Thank you. Okay, I cannot compete with Valerie's shoes. Wait until you see the beautiful Paula shoes. And I did not get the memo after COVID on how the hell to use shoes. So I'm just going to hide them. Compassion. Right, Nadia? All right, and it's story time. Story time, my ladies. I'm going to start with telling you about when I was a little girl. When my grandmother, whom I love, said to me that calladita te ves más bonita. Calladita te ves más bonita means when you are quiet, you look prettier. Right? But see, I think my grandmother's grandmother and her mother told her that. She didn't know. Fortunately, my mama and my papa never said this bullshit phrase to me, so thank God. Thank God for that. But I heard it so much around me that at some point I was like, all right, look, I'm just going to create this little alter ego of Pamelita that's calladita. You know, I'm going to have like a separate version of me that I send out into the world to do life in this Mexican, you know, calladita required life. And I did, because to me, calladita really meant elegant, polite, right-sized, whatever the hell that meant. And she felt like safety, you know? So I created a calladita to go do life for me, which is really convenient. And then I really believe that that was, you know, like the truth. The calladita needed to be the truth for me to do life successfully. I now know that those are lies. In fact, I know that the calladita, the quiet good girl, which was the embodiment of this principle, has the power to kill. Where are my Latinas? Woo! Sherecovers and Español in the house. So they know all about calladitas. But I'm also sure that every culture has a version of calladita, right? Did you guys also grow up with a be small, be quiet? Yeah? Yeah, okay. But here's a more interesting question. Did any of you get permission to start using your voice when you became a little older? Did anyone say, okay, now you're older, you can stop, you know, being calladita. You can actually start taking space. Did anyone say that to you? No. Shocking. I got a little lucky there, because when I was 18, I moved to Paris, France. It was awful. Yeah, I know. No, actually, it was the best year of my life. And not because of the croissants or the baguettes or the Frenchmen. It was actually Parisian women. You see, for the first time, I saw women that took up space, that used their voice. I mean, these women can actually walk into a bistro, sit down, eat by themselves, and not give a shit about what the world thinks of them. And I was like, I can do that? Really? And so I learned, right? I was like, okay, so now if I'm going to go back to Mexico, because it was just a year, unfortunately, if I'm going to go back to Mexico, I cannot do that calladita thing anymore. Like, I'm going to arrive to Mexico and take up space. Going to use my voice. So I arrived with great plans for Pamelita Calladita. Actually, I lived a calladita in Paris. And you know when you're like on top of the world and all of a sudden you're like, face plant. That kind of happened. So it was 1995. It was April, so 27 years ago. My father and I were just talking. It was the end of a perfect Saturday. It was night, it was beautiful, and all of a sudden, the electricity goes out in my house. And so, in the darkness, I see shadows of, give or take, 10 men. They had knives, they had guns, and they put the knives and guns to my mom and my dad. And they look at me and they say, get dressed, you're coming with us. And all of a sudden, my Parisian fantasy of, you know, like, I can use my, I'm going to be calladita. Because these men, all of a sudden, I went from this fairy tale land to a very bad Hollywood script where they would actually kidnap me. I was being kidnapped. The kidnappers were federales, so the Mexican police. So what do? And they were taking me for ransom. And you can imagine the next 30 hours were scary. I don't remember a lot because trauma kind of erases the stuff that you don't need to remember. But I do remember like the feeling of it, arriving to that half-constructed shack. They had a bucket for me to pee in. They had a cot. It was not the Biltmore. I remember the heat. I remember the panic. I remember the blindfold. And I remember the leader of the kidnapping gang sit beside me. He was very polite. He introduced himself to me. He said, "My name is La Víbora," the snake. I kid you not. And he had watched many Hollywood films. And he said to me, "This is how this is going to work. Your dad and your mom will pay the ransom, and we will get you home safely. But from here to there, it's up to you to survive. You have to be, a good girl. You cannot try to escape. You cannot try to talk. In fact, you can't do anything." And then he got really close to me. And I know because even through the blindfold, I could smell him. And he said, "Calladita, te ves más bonita." And all of a sudden, my little Pamelita Calladita alter ego, which I've left in Paris, sitting in a bistro somewhere, arrived to the room. She looked at me. She kind of undusted her skirt. She leaned against the wall. She looked at me and she said, "You see, you actually need me to survive." And I believed her. The good news is I survived. My incredible mother and father and brother figured out how to pay the ransom, get me back home. Of course, arriving home, it was very evident I could not just dive back into the natural life in Mexico. Everyone looked like kidnappers. So my dad was, just wonderful and put us all in a plane and took us to a faraway land where we could heal, which is how I ended up in Dallas, Texas. The land of the heat, right? Yes. I've lived there since then. And this is where it gets interesting because my parents returned to Mexico, but I was like, no, I don't want anything to do with that lovely country. I do love my Mexico, but at the time I was a little jaded, and a little traumatized, really, And so that's the thing. I'm 20 years old. I'm living in a different country. I am traumatized up to here, but I don't know this. Of course, my parents don't know this. I don't know what to ask for. Like, therapy would have been great to have at that point. Maybe talk about this would have been great. But I didn't do that. I went back to my old programming of calladita. That's all I knew to do because remember, for me, calladita was safety. Now, by choosing to be calladita, to be quiet, what I end up doing unconsciously is making two decisions. The first decision is I choose to now live in perpetual victimhood, right? Like I just drop into victimhood as identity. The second decision is I stop writing my story. I'm like, look, I'm going to be the character in what now felt really more like a soap opera, not so much a Hollywood film, in this telenovela, the soap opera of my life, right? I'm going to let you write my script, you write the next episode, and you write the other. If you'll take a pen, I'll give it to you. I will play the role to perfection, but you write it for me. So for the next 15 years, I gave pens to every guy I dated, every guy I worked for, every guy I married, there were a couple of those, every guy I divorced, there were a couple of those too, while I played the victim. And I played it well. I did. Because see, calladita loves victimhood. Calladita loves trauma. Calladita loves silence and shame and separation and stigma. And so I lived there for many years. But that's painful. That's shitty. It's a shitty way to live. So now I had another problem. Now I had to deal with the pain. It was safe, and I knew how to do it, but I needed to deal with the pain. Does anyone have any idea? Yes, for a hot minute, okay, it was a decade and a half, alcohol was my solution to that pain. I mean, because when you drink, you don't feel silent or small. You feel seen. At least I did. Mike, boobs. Sorry. When you drink, you feel happy, like you belong. I felt like I belonged. I did not feel like an alien foreigner. I felt loved and seen and light, and I could talk about the shit that had happened, you know? So for a long time, it really did feel like a solution. But as many of you know, it's actually a lie. It was 2009 when my beautiful baby boy, Stefan, little boy, and I went to a dinner and a movie. And I had too many Prosecco's with my popcorn. And I got drunk, and I drove us home drunk. And I know that there is a beautiful God because we did make it alive. But my son stood in the middle of the living room, and with his beautiful, liquid brown eyes, full of fear, he said to me, "Mommy, I was very, very scared." And then he said, "You know, Mom, I think it's actually my fault because I let you drive instead of calling your friend to drive us." And you thought the kidnapping was the worst part of my story, huh? No, this one was. That night changed everything for me. Because you see, the scary part was that all of this time, I'd been thinking that the villains, the lunatic writers to whom I've handed the pens, those were the people, the enemies that I was fighting. And this night, tonight, in that moment with my son looking at me, thinking that he was responsible for taking care of me, for the mess that I had become that day, that moment, I realized that the biggest enemy was me, that I had become my biggest enemy. And in the bathroom floor that night, where some of us have our biggest epiphanies, I realized I had to change. I had to do something. Like I made a decision to never break my son's heart, to never see the look in his eyes ever again like that, ever. And so I realized I was done. I was done being a victim. I was done numbing my pain. I was done. I made a decision. I had no idea how I was going to do it. But I knew that I was done. And I am happy to report that even though it wasn't overnight, I was able to stop playing the victim, to get back the ownership of my story, to fire addiction, to take Calladitas all access pass away. It's like, no más. No más. And the truth is, it sounds really simple when we say it like this, right? Like we're all happy here on the stage, kind of going, yeah, and then I got recovered. I mean, it sounds great. You're like, how the hell do you do that? And it's a journey, right? It's a journey, and each journey is perfect because in all the different beautiful pathways we each have to explore lays a real truth, right? That's each journey is their own. But what I found is that there was truly a beautiful framework that helped me make this recovery that revolution that I truly needed, like an inside-out change. So I'd love to share with you how I did that. Would you like to hear? Too many calladitas. Come on, do you want to hear? Eso. Okay, so number one. The first thing was to recover the connection with myself. For me, that meant I had to get sober. There was no way I was going to ever recover the connection with myself and with my heart without choosing to be present to my life, even in the shitty parts. And so what I realized this time when doing this work after several relapses, but in this moment, was that all of this time I'd gotten it wrong. I thought I had to love myself enough to find sobriety. And here I realized I had to actually find sobriety, to do the work of sobriety first, in order to create that space to love myself, to start to trust myself, to come home to myself. The second part of this little framework was to recover the power of my story. So back to my victimhood. Remember, in this old story, I was the victim, right? I was the kidnapped girl. I was the alien, the immigrant, separated from everyone. I was the single parent, and I always said that. I was like, I'm a single mom. And I was a relationship failure. I mean, total. So I really had to upgrade my story. And no one can do that for you, by the way. This really is a very personal decision. It's in the story that you tell yourself. So in this huge upgrade I gave my story, all of a sudden, I was none of those things anymore. I was a survivor. I was a Latina with a pretty wild, cool story to tell. I really was. That child, that beautiful human that I was raising, I got to raise him alone without anyone else having to vote in the process. I mean, that's so cool. Like, I don't know why that ever felt weird to me or sad. It's awesome. Number 3 in that little process is, I realized I wasn't a failure at relationships. In fact, I'd had the courage to leap into marriage twice, and the good sense to leave those relationships when they weren't working. And I think that's pretty badass. So you see, in this new narrative, I wasn't anyone's victim, not even my own. The third part of that framework, of this little formula, was I had to recover the connection with the world. This is where I got to heal all of the relationships that I had barreled through in the last many years. Now, I had a lot of work to do in this one, because nobody knows this. This is a little secret. I was a bit of an asshole when I drank. So here, I really did have to understand the power of honest amends. The beautiful power of honest amends. The power of boundaries. We're letting go of toxic relationships, right? Not being toxic in other people's lives. The power of my yes, the power of my no. Mentorship. My beautiful coach Elizabeth came into my life. Teachers, just mentors that I asked for help. Learning to ask for help is so important. Having that vulnerability. And then community. Because guys, she recovers. I was in New York at the first event after that little relapse of 2 years, sitting where you guys are, shaking to the core. I spent most of New York under the shower. And I would look at people on stage and go, oh my God, and now I get to be here telling my story. Just a little bomb of hope. It's just a little hop. It's a journey, but it's a little hop. Everyone can do it. It's a revolution. We just need to claim it, And at the very end of that, once I recovered the connection with myself, I recovered the power of my story, I recovered the connection with the world, then I could truly recover my voice. Now, of course, you're going to think, okay, so this is where you just destroyed Calladita, right? But not really. Because like Valerie was saying, every single one of the parts of ourselves that have helped us survive, my addiction, my calladita, the lunatic writers, I was the lunatic that had handed them the pen. Every single one of those parts were parts of me that had helped me survive, that had carried me through to where I was. And so if I was to love my story and truly recover my voice, I had to love all of it. I had to. I got to. And so that is why you see in that moment, of course, you can honor them, right? And say, thank you for your service, goodbye, which is what I did. Now you can go. But now you see why this truly becomes a revolution. I mean, it truly, truly changes everything from the inside out. So that's why I say that recovery, hang on, is la revolución. It really is. And I'm telling you a little bit of mine, but here's the deal. This is the invitation. Every single one of you right now, sitting here today, get to claim that revolution for themselves. Because here's the deal. Just like I was saying, I was in New York, I was in LA, and I was sitting there and I was going, oh my God, these people on stage, these conversations I'm having, these women, I was like, I want all of this, you know? And then I got on the plane. And this may happen to some of you. You get on the plane, right? You come home, and you slide right back into the old stories. Right back into the mentality of victimhood. Right back into the, oh yeah, here's a pen, write my story. And there's no shame to it, it's just a fact. I did it a million times. And so right now, every time that somebody comes up here, that's what we are doing. Every conversation that you have, every hug you get, it's an invitation. An invitation for you to claim your voice, to recover your story, to claim this badass, gorgeous journey of recovery as yours, like a second skin, to be proud of it. Because here's the truth. You need this for you. You need it for you because, as you can tell, it feels really good to live there. You need it for you because it'll change your life. And, like Nikki said, that beautiful word, and we also need you to claim your voice and find the power of your story. And then share it fiercely. Fiercely. Because when you do that, you give other people permission to do the same. And that is how we start to heal collectively. That is how we truly start to change this conversation around addiction and recovery. And that is the real revolution. Because I now know that just like Calladita has the power to kill, your story and your voice and all of yours, together with mine, have the power to give life. So I ask you to please join this revolution and to please take this invitation. Thank you. Before I leave, thank you. I want to very quickly say that this talk is dedicated to Sarah Gray Perez, who showed us how beautiful it is to recover the power of your voice and your story, and she is here with us today.